it's my goal with that. From what I read, it's very commercial, and we did a different. We did what's called the Golden Circle in Reykjavik, and that was really fantastic. We were on a cruise, so we ate on the ship and we brought bed food. The other thing I was going to say is the other thing I did during my summer vacation is I had cataract surgery. And if the opportunity ever arises and you've been wearing glasses for years and years, grab it.
I had it done, but
It didn't come out right?
okay, am I right? But I have other problems with my eyes. You know, it's astigmatism.
Oh, I have-
You have to pay more.
Yeah, I paid the extra money for the
I
astigmatism.
didn't pay the extra
And
money.
for the-
I don't wear glasses.
So I use that all the time.
So you took the cruise from here or you took it
We
there?
flew to Amsterdam and the cruise left from Amsterdam. Went to Ireland also.
One of the items.
Two places in Ireland.
Where'd you go in Ireland?
We went to,
There you go. You're on.
no, it's on. I don't want to talk. Let's start and I'll tell you afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my working days, I used to on Shabbos sometimes give a real sermon. I often did the teaching. Instead, I would put a handout with an Agadah or some contrasting commentaries by Mefarshim. But one of the things I did periodically is to teach a poem that was related in some way to the parsha, and use that as a commentary on the parsha from a very contemporary point of view. There are a number of books that I can recommend for doing that if you're interested in it. Of course, Amichai has a lot of poems that are sermon worthy. I'm sure some of you have used them, referred to them before. There's a book by Curzon published by JPS called Modern Poems on the Bible, which goes through various parshiot in the Chumash, which are worthy. And there's a Henny Winecart is her name, wrote a book called Sarah's Daughters Sing, which is a collection of poetry by Jewish women. Many of them touch upon biblical characters and give you a perspective. We're talking about the relationship with Rachel and Leah, and from Leah's point of view, from Rachel's point of view, their poetry on that. So there's a poem that I came across by the Israeli poet Dan Pagis, who died a few years ago. I came across it. The conservative movement for several years in the early 90s published a magazine which was a movement magazine. And the seminary, the women's league, the men's club, the United Synagogue gave up, probably for financial reasons, their own little magazines, and they had a combined magazine for several years. And Ann Lapidus Lerner, who taught Hebrew literature at the seminary for many, many years, until she retired maybe about 10 or 12 years ago, had an article in which she talked about this poem, which fascinated me. And so I draw on that in what I'm going to be saying. It's a wonderful poem that I thought was appropriate for the high holidays because it talks about our relationship with God. And, Heschel has God in search of man and man's quest for God. And so this theme of hide and seek draws on Heschel also. So let's begin by looking. What I want to do is look at the poem with you, just read it through, and then to talk about how I dealt with it in a sermon on the holidays, and how you could incorporate this along with other materials into a very personal, theologically oriented kind of high holiday sermon. So it's called in Hebrew Machavoim, hide and seek. B'chatzer achorit ba'olam sichaknu hu va'ani kisiti einai yitchabei achat shtayim shalosh lo milfanai lo me'achorai lo betochi me'az ani mechapes kol kach harbe shanim az ma im ani lo motze otcha tzei kvar tzei ata ro'eh shenichnati. In the backyard of the universe, we played, he and I.
Closed it.
I covered my eyes. He hid. 1, 2, 3, not before me, not behind me, not within me. Since then, I've been looking so many years. So what if I don't find you? Come out already, come out. You see that I've surrendered. Now, in my sermon, I began with touching upon the game of hide and seek in my own memory, and I think we all have those kinds of memories. I said that one of my favorite childhood games, and one of the few games that I really remember clearly from my childhood, is hide and seek. How during the summer we would play outside, hiding in the shrubbery behind the fence or in a backyard tool shed. Sometimes we would play inside, hiding under beds and closets behind the draperies. For the person who was the it, the challenge was to find all of those who had hidden themselves. But it wasn't really much of a challenge. After all, you couldn't really lose, for there would always be at least one child who would hide in a very obvious place. And there were others who would never couldn't keep themselves from giggling as you walked by their hiding places. But being one of those who had to hide was another matter altogether. This was a more challenging role, and one that was fraught with fear and anxiety. There was, of course, the fear that you would be found very quickly, and you would have lost the game and become the it. But there was also the fear that you might not be found at all. You may have memories of crouching there in your hiding place and wondering how long you should wait before revealing yourself. Or you might have wondered, what if I wait and he doesn't find me? And as time passed, there might be that seeking feeling in the pit of your stomach that you had been abandoned, left behind while everyone else has gone on to something else. And then I told a story that I don't remember where I got it from. It sounds like I might have got it from one of Larry Kushner's books or something of that nature. It seems as though Rabbi Baruch's grandson Yechiel had a similar experience. A Hasidic story relates that one day he was playing hide and seek with another boy. He hid himself well and waited for his playmate to find him. After waiting a long time, he finally came out from his hiding place, but the other boy was nowhere in sight. Little Yechiel now realized that his companion had not even looked for him. Weeping, he came to his grandfather to complain about his faithless friend. Rabbi Baruch's eyes too brimmed with tears, and he said, God is saying the same thing. I hide, but no one wants to seek me. So according to Rabbi Baruch, God has gone into hiding and he's waiting for us to seek him out. But who is the one who's really gone into hiding? And who's the one who's abandoned the other? Perhaps, as Rabbi Baruch suggested to his grandson, God has hidden himself and we've stopped looking for him. Perhaps we've abandoned him and he's indeed shed many tears waiting for us to find him, or at least to seek him. Perhaps we've abandoned God, but perhaps it's we who have been abandoned by him. It's so often difficult for us to see God's presence in this world of ours. We turn to him in moments of sadness and sorrow, and occasionally even in moments of joy, and so often we don't find him. I apologize for the male language, but I'm of that age. Perhaps we think he's hidden himself too well, or perhaps it's the other way around. It's we who've hidden ourselves from God, and he has given up trying to find us. So then I turn to the poem, this wonderful poem by Don Pagis, who uses the metaphor of the game of hide and seek to speak about our relationship with God. And it highlights our problem in a very beautiful way, one which I think has something to say to us. I gave this on Yom Kippur.
You share the poem after you?
Yes, no, I have this on their seats. You can either copy it and put a sheet of paper on the seats, or if you have other handouts that you have, a program booklet or whatever other readings, you can put that
One
in.
thing, do you open up with the poem or do you open?
No,
up?
I open up with the introduction
Open up with
and
the
I come to the
introduction, then
poem.
the poem's enough.
But they've been sitting and they've looked at it already, it's on their seats. So I said, let's look at the poem together. And the English translation was done by Ann Lerner. And I read it out loud first in Hebrew and in English, and then I go over it part by part. B'chatzer achorit ba'olam, in the backyard in the universe, we played, he and I. So where does the story take place? In a backyard, as we would expect. But where is that backyard? It's in the universe, ba'olam. These two locations in the backyard and the universe give us contradictory messages. The backyard is an intimate space, closed off from the bustle of the street, often fenced in and protected, whereas the universe in its vastness is cosmic space. And in Hebrew, the word olam can refer to either space, eternal space, or to time. Playing in the backyard is an ordinary activity. Playing with an awareness of the endless expanse of the universe puts the game on a different plane. It indicates that this is no ordinary game of hide and seek that we're speaking of. It's one that's of cosmic significance. So who are the players and who is the I? The poet doesn't say. If we assume, as I do, that the poet is using the metaphor of the game of hide and seek to say something about our relationship with God, we would then have to assume that the I is the human narrator and the other is God. Kisiti einai itchabe achat shtayim shalosh lo milfanai lo meachorai lo betochi. I covered my eyes, he hid. 1, 2, 3. Not before me, not behind me, not within me. The game is more or less what we would expect. The narrator covered his eyes while the other hid. He counted to 3 and began to look. So when we look for God, where do we look? Now, this lo milfanai, lo meachorai, lo betochi may be familiar to you because a similar idea comes in Kriyat Shema al Hamitah, in the traditional Siddur, which has a lot of magical stuff in it. So at one point, it says that we should recite 3 times the Birkat Kohanim Yivarechecha, and then 3 times Hinei lo yanum lo yishan shomer Yisrael, and 3 times Lishuatcha kiviti Hashem, and then we're supposed to say 3 times B'Shem Hashem Elohei Yisrael, Mimini Michael, Umismoli Gavriel, Milfanai Uriel, Umeachorai Raphael, Bial Roshi Shchinat El. But I found something that's even closer to what Pagis has here. It turns out that it was long customary for pious Jews to remain in the synagogue after the daily Shacharit service in order to recite personal supplications that weren't part of the regular service. In some of the old Siddurim that I examined from the 16th and 17th centuries that I worked with in writing my doctoral dissertation, these supplications include the recitation of a series of 72 biblical verses. In fact, it's usually had the section Shivim Ushtayim Psukim because there's a mystical name of God of 72, and it corresponds to that. Followed by prayers asking that God watch over the worshiper and protect him. And some of these prayers conclude with the following passage: Hashem bimini, uvaruch bismoli, Elohim milfanai, va'adir me'achorai, u'shchinat el al roshi, oseh shalom birmamav, etc. So this differs from Kriyat Shema al Hamitah, which has names of angels, and here we have different names for God, mystical names of God. Yah is on my right and Baruch on my left, Elohim before me, and Adir behind me, and Shchinat El over my head. To the traditional Jew, God is everywhere. The world is suffused with his presence. Even if we were to flee from God's presence, we couldn't do it. And so the psalmist says in Psalm 139, where can I escape from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I descend to Sheol, you are there. If I take wing with the dawn to come rest on the western horizon, even there your hand would be guiding me. Your right hand will be holding me fast. If I say, surely darkness will conceal me, night will provide me with cover. It's hide and seek again. Darkness is not dark for you. Night is as light as day. Darkness and light are the same. To the traditional Jew, God is to be found everywhere and anywhere. But what does our poem say? 1, 2, 3, not before me, not behind me, not within me. When we search for God, we might begin by looking in front of us. We look for God's presence in our daily lives, in nature, in history. And then we look behind us at what's not immediately visible or accessible to us, but which is still outside of ourselves. Perhaps this includes philosophical and mystical speculation. And then we look inward into ourselves in our search for God. In his book, God Was in This Place and I Did Not Know, Larry Kushner says that the essence of spirituality is a return to the self, a redirection of the vision of the one who asks the question, an almost serendipitous discovery that what is sought is and has always been right here all along. It, in other words, is never somewhere else. But again, what does Pagis say? Lo milfanai, lo meachorai, lo betochi. What does this mean? That he looks in front and then behind and then deep within himself, but still does not find God. Or perhaps it means something else entirely. The narrator tells us that he covered his eyes, but he doesn't tell us that he uncovered them. Perhaps he's not really tried to find God in all of the places that one might expect to find him. Perhaps God is there all along, but the narrator is just unable to see him there. Me'az ani mechapes kol kach harbe shanim, az ma'im ani lo motzei otcha, tzei kvar tzei, ata ro'eh shenichnati. Since I've been looking so many years, so what if I don't find you? Come out already, come out. You see that I've surrendered. Our game of hide and seek did not end as most such games do. Ordinarily, the game would be over when the seeker finds those who are hidden, or when he gives up, leading them to reveal themselves. We see here that years have passed, but the game continues. Our seeker has been searching for many years, but he's not yet found God. And he seems to have lost patience with the game. It's gone on too long. So what if I don't find you? What difference does it make anyway? But yet he still cares. Come out already, come out. You see that I've surrendered. Has he really surrendered, or will the game continue? Is this capitulation? Or is it really a plea, a prayer to God, asking that he come out and reveal himself? In this poem, Don Pagis uses the metaphor of a child's game to portray modern man's failure to connect with God. As Ann Lerner writes, ultimately, we cannot know from the poem itself who is responsible for the failure to connect. The narrator may be faulted for covering his eyes and for not searching in those places where we traditionally look for God. Or God might be taken to task for hiding and refusing to come out after the game is over. There's no clear resolution, no simple suggestion for improving this relationship. And yet, despite the narrator's frustration and desire to bring an end to it, the game still continues. And as long as it does, there's still the hope that he and we will succeed. Now, before I go to the concluding part of the sermon, I just want to say that it's all very theological, but I think that almost everybody in our congregations has gone through years of the struggle of trying to find God or to see God, and failing to do so in so many ways. And so the last part, I go to Heschel and talk about the three ways to find God, three ways to God's presence. We're all engaged in the game of hide and seek with God. If we weren't, if we really didn't care, I don't think we'd be here today. But it seems to me that coming to services on Yom Kippur just doesn't do it for most of us. The crowds are too big, the service is too unfamiliar, the distractions too many. So where then are the paths to God's presence? Where must we look if we're to find him? Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his wonderful book, God in Search of Man, suggested for the Jew, there are three paths that lead to God. The first way to God is through learning to see God's presence in the world around us. And we do this by opening our eyes to the wonders of creation and by cultivating within us a deep sense of gratitude for all that we have. Prayer, worship is both a means of cultivating the sense and a response to what we see and experience. And I mentioned that when Jacob fled from Esau and he came to Beersheba, and he came to this isolated spot on the road from Beersheba to Haran, he had this dream of a staircase going from earth to heaven, and angels were ascending and descending, and God appeared to him and assured him that he would protect him and bring him home safely. And Jacob awoke and said, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, v'anochi lo yadati. Jacob was shaken. He thought that he had lain down to sleep in an ordinary spot on the roadside. But experiencing the presence of God, he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. And he took the stone that he'd used as a pillow and poured oil over it, enacting a monument. Jacob had thought that he had stopped in an ordinary place just anywhere, and he learned that it was the gateway to heaven. But you know, it was just an ordinary place. It's just that Jacob was unable to see how awesome the ordinary reality is. He felt the presence of God in the ordinary, and he responded with worship. So when we recite a bracha before eating, and when we see the wonders of nature or a great person, or when we put on new clothes or use something new for the first time, or even when we go to the bathroom, when we recite a bracha, we become sensitized to the spiritual significance of all these commonplace things. We come to see the world in a new way. We find God and we experience his presence in our lives, and we respond with praise and with gratitude. The second path to God, according to Heschel, is through study, by learning to sense God's presence in the Bible and the teachings of our rabbis and the writings of our great thinkers and spiritual giants across the ages. But you have to understand that you won't feel God's presence the first time you pick up a Chumash or a Gemara or a work that derives from the Jewish mystical tradition. You have to immerse yourself in these books. You have to read and reread them over and over again until they become a very part of the fabric of your being. It's not a matter of knowing their contents or of being able to repeat the stories contained in them, or of knowing how they decide the halacha on question X or Y. They must become a part of you so that they begin to shape how you perceive the world and how you respond to the issues that you confront every day in your life. And that doesn't happen quickly or all at once. You have to give it time. You have to be patient. You can't be goal-oriented, for then you would fail. But if you keep at it, then what you have learned will become the word of God, and your studies will become for you a path to God. And the third path to God is through action, by learning to sense God's presence through sacred deeds. But here too, it's not the mechanical observance of the mitzvot, but by the observance of the mitzvot with kavanah. In the mystical tradition, there's a custom of preceding the performance of a mitzvah with the recitation of a kavanah, a brief statement of the purpose of the mitzvah or the desired effect that its performance is supposed to have. While there's an element of magic to these kavanot, the idea that we should pause and focus on the meaning that a particular mitzvah has is a wonderful one. The observance of the mitzvot, whether it be the observance of kashrut or Shabbat, of daily prayer, of ritual purity, or of the mitzvot that guide our relations between our other human beings, can sensitize us to God's presence day by day. Then I conclude by saying in his poem, Hide and Seek, Don Pagis raises the issue of the absence of the sense of sanctity of God's presence in our lives. We want a personal relationship with God, but we're at a loss as to where and how to look for him. I covered my eyes, he hid. 1, 2, 3, not before me, not behind me, not within me. Heschel suggests that the paths to God are worship, studying, and the doing of sacred deeds. These are not easy paths to tread, and we cannot walk them with our eyes closed. What then can we do? We can but uncover our eyes and pray that God will become visible. And then perhaps we say, with Pagis, Tsei kvar, tsei, ata ro'eh shenichnati. Come out already, come out. You see that I've surrendered. Or we might express our longings as did Yehuda Levi in a piyut, an ofan for Simchat Torah, Kvodom Le'olam. Lord, where shall I find you? High and hidden in your place. And where shall I not find you? The world is full of your glory. Darashti kirvatcha b'chol libi karaticha. I've sought your nearness. With all my heart have I called you. Uvitseti likratcha, likrati mitzaticha. And going out to meet you, I found you coming toward me.
Very nice.
Mr. Koch.
What if the character of the poem art would play hide and seek in his face, that time man, and then God finally says,
He gives up.
now, and the red light, I need
So that's a,
that's the God in the man.
okay. So that's another sermon which you could do, which you can do all these things. You know, the Torah says, "Shalosh pamim b'shana ye'era kol zuchurcha," but we could generalize that zuchurcha, that we have to appear before God, and we have to wave the flag and say, "God, we're here. Remember us. You're looking for us. We're coming out of hiding. We want to see you."
Yeah, but God is suggesting God is
God is coming out of hiding.
To look for.
To look for us.
finding. God's saying, finding.
Yes, I'm saying, but in the end, so God, you say, but God gave up. He couldn't find us, and so then we have.
So he said,
So then we have to come out of our hiding
yeah, okay.
and say, God, we're here, and show God that we're here for Him.
Very, very nice. I have to run to a meeting. This is
Sure.
a wonderful day, wonderful day. Thank you all so much. Nice to see you all.
Of course.
I have a couple of thoughts.
Mhm.
First of all, another source of poetry and discussion about Hebrew poetry. Fortunately, my friend and our colleague Steve Sager passed away in May, and he had a website, and it's still up there as far as I know, called the Sicha Conversation, and he used poetry, mainly Amichai and Rivka Miriam were his two favorites, and he would and he translated it, made beautiful translations. Rivka Miriam had, as a eulogy, commented on his translations of her work, but he also discusses some of those things as well, because the whole idea he has bringing ancient texts and modern poetry together in conversation with folks. This is the way he did. I've had him as scholar in residence many times over the years at various places I've been. So that's another source for some of these things. But thinking about this particular poem, first thing that hit me was Agnon's Talita Cheret, which we studied with Holtz, I think, in the seminary, where about pulling the talit over your face and can you see it, whatever. The other thought I had was when we played hide and seek in the neighborhood almost every night, it seemed like, part of that game was we had to come home. I mean, no, you remember how it was? Yeah, 5, 10, 15, 20, and so forth. Right. Anyone around my den shall be it. And then they would claim, the person who was it couldn't stick near the den, but we had to try to sneak in without him catching us, get to the pole that he had said he was counting on, and say, "Home free," right? And that's we had to come in and not be caught. If he caught us, he would say tap tap on so and so coming into den, or tap tap on so and so hiding behind the tree, or whatever. That was part of the way we played it. I don't know how you played it in your neighborhood, but that's.
So I just want to make one other comment. Is this is a sermon. I'm trying to be inspirational. I've been struggling this year because of the world is collapsing around us, and we're living in a time of Pester Panim. I'm trying to find an opportunity to have a mini class of 3 or 4 sessions to teach. Yitz Greenberg back in the 70s wrote a paper about I think it was called the Third Covenant or something like that. That after, it was a whole series of papers that he wrote, but this particular one he talks about it was his own exposure to the Holocaust and how it was shattering to him. By the way, he has some discussions of this on various talks he gave on YouTube that you can listen to. Recently there was he was interviewed. Was it
Hadar.
Hadar? It was the Hadar. Right. So it's one of the things on Hadar's website, I think, but you can get it on YouTube even without their link if you put his name in. But he talks about what a shattering experience it was when he really studied the Holocaust and came to grips with it. My sermon doesn't answer that kind of problem. His answer at that time was that God broke the covenant with us. That the covenant with Abraham and with us in general was that if we follow in God's ways, that God is going to protect the Jewish people. And it didn't happen. So Greenberg has this idea that we enter a new covenant with God. This one is a voluntary covenant of God, which has no element of coercion. There's no Mount Sinai hanging over our head. And the question is, what are the implications of this notion for Jewish life today to our own behavior? So I'm looking for an opportunity to teach that, but I was going to do this fall before the holidays, but then something came up on the night that I always teach that I can't do it. I don't have enough weeks. Yeah.
So you actually set me up perfectly for what I saw in this, which is that my first thought when I read this was Leah Goldberg's Et Elohai Biblical Faith.
Mhm.
And she's doing exactly a similar thing, going so far as to take God for task. You're the one who did this.
Right.
You need to pay. And I think exactly what you were just saying like resonates for me so much. Just because I think it'd be a really nice side by side. Two very different theologies. The other piece is I would just say, could you repeat the name of the translator?
Anne, Anne, Lapidus. It's the Ashkenazic Lapidut.
I'm very interested in her choice of words
Learner.
for surrender here,
Uh-huh.
because I know it had to be poetic, but I read the Hebrew and I'm sort of like, I think in a way it's going back to that idea of giving up at the end of the game. But I see what she's doing. I had a hard time with that when I first read it because I
Okay.
wondered about where it was, what it means.
So how would you translate that?
No, I mean, Rikana is to surrender, 100%. But because it's in the context of the game, my first thought was this should have said give up. And
Yeah.
doesn't mean
Mm.
something different.
Mm,
And I just wonder if it means something different or not.
mm.
I think that she's probably trying to find
Mhm.
good language for the translation.
I like the choice now, but initially it was jarring to me.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Her husband was a rabbi, by the way. He passed away about 10 years ago also. His son is a rabbi also.
I have a cultural, not Jewish, but a cultural connection to this. There's a song in Dear Evan Hansen called You Will Be Found. And it's really beautiful. And just as maybe a hook at the beginning, because more people might be familiar with that. Just what so resonates with me is that feeling of when you're hiding, is someone going to find me? Or am I how long do I stay here? It's very frightening. Thank you so much.
Strikes me as singularity, and Judaism is so much not meant to be a thing.
Mm, mm,
If you are not alone, but if you're within a community, then you can perhaps
not feel that.
you can feel presence
Mm,
in a way that by yourself,
mm,
God.
Yes, but you might also feel more estranged because we don't usually talk with others about our deepest doubts and questions. And if you're in a community and say everybody's davening away, you might be saying, well, they buy the whole package, and I'm having trouble with it.
both.
And so you can't. I mean, you might be right, but you can also feel even more isolated.
Yeah. Or alienated outside of.
Right. Okay, well, thanks for coming.
Asher Koach. Asher Koach. Thank you.
But there are all sorts of poems that raise all sorts of interesting
Yes,
ideas and issues, and even piyutim, if you pick the right stanza, can have something to say.